Well, hello again, and thanks for joining in tonight. This is the second lesson in the book of Esther, so we will be continuing on the themes that we set forth last time. The main one being the church being caught in what I call the conflict in the heavenlies. A physical demonstration against God's enemies that He has set the church in place for. This is a conflict that we are in the middle of, and we don't even see it. We only feel the symptoms of it. Much of this conflict comes in the form of suffering, and so the church doesn't always feel like it's winning, but we continue to win this victory that was first won by Christ on the cross, and we are continuing that victory as His body on earth now. But we are on earth. It is a sojourn in a place where we don't belong. So the story of Esther fits this perfectly, as she is a member of Jews who are still in exile at this point in Persia, having been removed from the land by the Babylonians. And we saw last week Ahasuerus, the Persian emperor, represents the Godhead, and most specifically God the Son. And he banishes Vashti, his queen, who represents the disobedient bride, and that being Israel. And this all sets the stage for Esther coming in as the new queen, and she represents the church. So we will begin tonight. That was from chapter 1. So we'll begin tonight with chapter 2. And I'll start by reading the first 4 verses. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. So there's not a whole lot to be taken from these verses, but suffice it to say, a new bride for the king is being sought. He was probably, when it says he remembered Vashti, probably getting lonely, and there in the throne room. So a new bride is being sought. All right, let's go on then to verses 5 through 7. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Okay, so we have a genealogy going back to the ancestor who had been carried out of Jerusalem. So this shows that it was important still for the Jews to be maintaining their genealogies, and the captivity was a landmark event. It was a milestone in the history of Israel. Or Judah, and you see in the genealogy of Christ in Matthew, it's broken into 3 groups of 14, and the last group of 14 begins with the captivity. So, a really important event. Now, this young woman's Jewish name was Hadassah, but she was known as Esther. That would have been her Persian name, and these names are significant. Hadassah means myrtle, and the myrtle tree figures fairly heavily in Scripture. And I have some scriptures for you here. The first one being Isaiah 41, verses 17 through 20. When the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights, and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, and the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, and the pine together, that they may see and know, may consider and understand together, that the hand of the Lord has done this, the Holy One of Israel has created it. Okay, the myrtle is again mentioned in Isaiah 55, verses 10 through 13. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress, instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall make a name for the Lord, an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. Okay, we've also got Zechariah 1, verses 8 through 11. Verses 8 through 11. I saw in the night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the glen, and behind him were red, sorrel, and white horses. Then I said, What are these, my Lord? And the angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. So the man who was standing among the myrtle trees answered, These are they whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth. They answered the angel of the Lord who was standing among the myrtle trees, and said, We have patrolled the earth, and behold, all the earth remains at rest. And then finally, I've got Nehemiah 8, verses 13 through 15. On the second day, the heads of the fathers' houses of all the people, with the priests and the Levites, came together to Ezra, the scribe, in order to study the words of the law. And they found it written in the law that the Lord had commanded by Moses that the people of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month, and that they should proclaim it and publish it in all their towns and in Jerusalem. Go out to the hills and bring branches of olive, wild olive, myrtle, palm, and other leafy trees to make booths, as it is written. Okay, so all of these passages that mention the myrtle tree have to do with promise, and coming blessing in the Lord. Particularly in Isaiah 55, it compares the myrtle as part of this comparison of the word of the Lord being like sowing seed that brings forth fruit. And the purposes of the Lord will come about, and it will be known that He has created it. And then the passage in Zechariah was recognized as by the ancient church as being about Christ standing among the church. The myrtle trees are the church in that prophecy. So we see the myrtle tree as being the church. God's work on earth is leading, in Old Testament times, is leading to the church, and this is his continuing work on earth even now. So then in Nehemiah, we see the myrtle brought into the Feast of Tabernacles. That's what was being talked about as Ezra read the law. And the Feast of Tabernacles is connected to the second advent of Christ, and we'll get into that more later on. So the name Hadassah, meaning myrtle, is a direct reference to these types of the church that the myrtle tree presents in the Old Testament. But also we've got the word Esther. Esther is derived from the word Ishtar. Ishtar was one of the main pagan gods of Persia. And the Phoenicians, as you may remember from your Western Civ classes back when they taught Western Civ, they were great traders and travelers, and they got as far as they lived in modern-day Lebanon. And in fact, I believe Tyre and Sidon were both Phoenician cities. And of course, they're referenced often in Scripture. And they sailed as far as the British Isles, and they brought Ishtar to the Druids, extra god to worship among the pagans, and that name Ishtar in English morphed into Easter, and it is only English-speaking nations that call the Resurrection Day Easter. The rest of the world calls it Pascha or Paschal, but for the English-speaking words, it's Easter, and that is derived from the name Esther. So we have either way you look at it, both names have a connection to the church. Okay, so the second thing we see in this passage of Esther is that Mordecai is her kinsman redeemer. He's a cousin. Her parents have died for some reason. He's the nearest relative. He's her cousin. Presumably he's older, though we don't know that for sure. But in any case, he becomes her male authority, and we will see that play out as the narrative goes on. Okay, so let's read on. We'll do verses 8 through 11. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Okay, so for some reason, Mordecai feared repercussions of some sort if it was found out that Esther was Jewish. So he told her to just keep it quiet. And we see that Esther is chosen from a multitude. And she's now in the under the custody of the king, and yet Mordecai still he does not renege on his responsibility over her, he hangs around outside trying to get news about her, make sure she's doing all right. All right, 12 through 14. Now, when the turn for each came, for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. So we see here Esther is made beautiful, and she is a reflection of the church in this, as we read in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 27. Well, let's start in 25 through 27. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy without blemish. So Esther is beautified. She is made beautiful, just as Christ makes the church beautiful. And he does that through our sanctification. He is making us beautiful to be presented to him in splendor. And this is exactly the same way it was with Esther. And the other similarity is it takes a long time. I don't know what Esther did to pass the time after being dipped in oil for 12 months. But it takes a long time, and for the church, for each member of the church, it takes a long time, right up to the moment that you die. So don't be discouraged if it seems like the results are not forthcoming. It is a long process. Okay, 15 through 18. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go in to the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He was also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Okay, so first we see here that Esther is discipled. She goes to the eunuch for teaching on what she should take in with her, instead of just, following her own will or, whatever she guessed. She was taught, she was advised on what to take. She finds favor. She is immediately loved. She finds grace and favor in the king's sight. This is all that we can claim as the church. We don't merit anything, but we have just won his favor through his love. And she receives a wedding feast. And at this, I'm going to invoke my pal, Rabanus Morris, and read you what he says about this feast. It is evident that the magnificent banquet for Esther's wedding prepared for both the princes and the people, represents the greatest bliss that is enjoyed by the entire human race, both great and small, for the spiritual union of Christ with the church. In this banquet, in fact, no carnal foods are consumed by those who are worthy to participate in it. Instead, they consume a spiritual diet of wisdom and virtue. In this banquet, all the faithful receive the holy mysteries of the body and blood of the Lord as a remedy for their salvation. Here the meal of eternal life resides, and our King gives peace to all the provinces and bestows abundant gifts in freeing those who believe in him from the weight of sins and rewarding them with spiritual gifts. Therefore he says in the gospel, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So he manages to bring in the spiritual benefits, the spiritual food of our union with Christ, and how that's a blessing to the entire world, even those that don't partake in it. And he also mixes in the elements of the Eucharist. So it's it's a beautiful picture. This wedding feast of Esther is a beautiful picture of our entire relationship with Christ, and it behooves us well to pursue this relationship as deeply as we can, even now. Okay, so now we see that Esther is on the inside with the king. She is the king's queen now, and Mordecai is still on the outside. And this means going forward, the types are going to become more layered. So let's go on let's finish out chapter 2. Now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So we see here that Mordecai waits upon the king and serves him, and he serves the queen as well. He is sitting at the gate, which is a place of honor, so Mordecai has some standing in the city. But he is there in the service of his king, as it shows when he reports this conspiracy. And this, at this point, we can invoke Psalm 123:2. Behold, as the eyes of servants look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a maidservant to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God, till he has mercy upon us. This is the right work of a bondservant, and we are bondservants of Christ. So we must wait upon our master, being ready to act at his word. And so this is so with Mordecai. Again, this we see in this passage the importance of authority, which we'll get back to in a minute. And at the end, we see that Mordecai's name is written in a book that will be important to his salvation. This is shared by the church in Revelation 13, verse 8. We see all who dwell on earth will worship it. This is this is talking about the statue that the Antichrist builds. All who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. Our names are written in a book, just as Mordecai's was. And then again in Revelation 20, verse 12, we read, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done." So, this writing of Mordecai's name in a book also reflects the church. So, again, Esther is on the inside, enjoying all the blessings of being with the king in his courts. Mordecai is on the outside, just trying to survive and serve the king in a country where he doesn't belong. And they have together an unbreakable bond. It's a dual type of the church. Esther represents the church in glory, and Mordecai represents the church in suffering. And both are serving the king. Now, if we revisit verse 20, Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. We see that in some way, the church in suffering has authority or some kind of power over the church in glory. And it is indeed what we do in the here and now during our time and space as the church that will make the church in glory what it is. And the form that usually takes will be what we do in the face of persecution and suffering. And we are about to see that in chapter 3. So, we'll take a breath and start chapter 3. Verses 1 through 6. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Mispronounced it. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now, at this point, I would like to mention that the Septuagint, which, as we all know, is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, there is a prologue to Esther, and it goes on for several verses. But the main thing to gather from it is it's a more detailed version of Mordecai becoming aware of this plot against Ahasuerus that ended chapter 2, and it indicates that Haman knew about this plot, and he may have been part of it, and this is why he hated Mordecai so much. I mean, be that as it may, either way, we can see that Haman is all about self-serving and ambition. And he is very much a satanic character here. and it is reflected in other ways as well. For instance, we saw that he was awarded an exalted position. This compares to Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 through 15. Moreover, 12, Son of man, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering: sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle, and crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. Now, this is a message directed to the king of Tyre, but it is actually about Satan. And it shows that he was proud and ambitious and exalted himself all the way to the point of desiring worship. And here we can invoke Isaiah 14, 12 through 14. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn! How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low! You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. This is Satan. This is his desire to be worshipped. And we see this as well with Haman, as he wants all the people of the empire to bow down to him. And so, of course, Mordecai does not. He stands out as the counterculture. This is what the church should be doing. We are the counterculture. And we need to separate ourselves from Babylon so that people notice it. Unfortunately, this also puts Mordecai against the king. He is disobeying the king's order. So this makes him guilty before the king. Just like the church, we all stand guilty before the king. But Mordecai is going to count on something else, which we will see next time. But Satan, to return to Haman, Satan isn't satisfied to attack anyone in particular. He hates all believers, and so his attacks are very broad. And this is another way that we can see that Mordecai and all the Jews, because of him, represent the suffering church. Okay, here in the post-incarnation world, let's go on then and read 7 through 11. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots, before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month, till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. So Haman is using occult practice here to determined which date would be best to wipe out the Jews. Occultism is satanic. The signet ring was a sign of authority that the king gave to him, so he does have authority here on earth. He accuses. Satan is known as the accuser. He offers a bribe to the king. This is not unlike the temptation of Christ, when Satan is bribing him with things if he will only bow down to him and worship him. And Haman's work means death for all Jews throughout the empire, just as Satan's great work, the fall, meant death for all men. So he is very much a type of Satan in this narrative, and fulfilling his type as the Godhead, Ahasuerus turns the people over to his power. This last statement, is reminiscent of Job. Now, Ahasuerus is just a type. He does not have perfect knowledge like God, and all types fall short because they're all just men. They're not God. So I don't want to take it too far with Ahasuerus, and that he really knew what he was doing, because he didn't. He was suffered the foibles of all men, particularly men in power. But it's still. This is very much like the setup that faced Job. Okay, let's look at verse 12 through the end of the chapter. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces, to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in his own script, and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces, with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. All right, so Ahasuerus' sovereignty is indicated in the ring, and that gives Haman power to go about his foul deed. But God displays his sovereignty over the lots that were cast, and therefore the perfect day for this annihilation is roughly a year away. It is a long time away, and that gives events time to develop. And so Satan and the church, just like Haman and Mordecai, are left to wait. And so we wait. But vindication comes eventually. Through this time, the king appears to be distant and uninterested, not really knowing what's going on. This is not true of God, but it certainly appears that way sometimes as we are, muddling our way through our sojourn on earth. And then we end with the statement about confusion in the city. There was chaos arising in the city. This is another indication of Haman's satanic character, in that his work is chaos. But as we know from 1 Corinthians chapter 14 through 14:33, God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. So, as we pursue this narrative, we will see that God will straighten this out. He will bring peace from this chaos. So, that's where we're going to stop for tonight. Next time, we will look at chapters 4 and 5. I hope this has been a blessing to you, and I hope you can join again next time. So, everybody have a wonderful evening, rest of the evening and rest of the week, and we will see you next time.